All right, everyone. So in this lecture video, what I'm going to be talking about is communication from your nervous system to your muscular system. So we haven't talked a lot about what's going on with neurons and neural signaling and any of that information, but really what we're talking about here is what's happening at the sarcolemma. So what's happening at the membrane of your muscle cell. So we talked a little bit about in your last video what muscle contraction is and how it works, right? But in order for that contraction to occur, right, we know that there's a signal that needs to go there, right? When we're talking about homeostasis, or kind of like our effector that's going on with here, it's kind of the same thing here, right? It's the response to the stimuli that we're experiencing from the outer world. Okay, so when we're talking about communication here, what we're really talking about is the motor neuron. The neuron, or the nerve that attaches to each of your skeletal muscle fibers. So again, you have a nerve that's going to attach to each fiber that's going to allow that signaling to occur, okay, for your contraction. Okay, so what we're really interested in here with the nerve is just to note that the motor nerve is going to send signals to the muscle fiber in order to trigger a muscle contraction, right? There's going to be some kind of neural signal that actually allows us to get that potential to develop, right, between the sodium and potassium to send the other signals down the muscle fiber to get it to contract, okay? So there are a few parts to this, okay? So the first is the synapse. So the synapse is the point where the neuron meets the motor end plate. So the motor end plate is a part that's actually on the actual sarcolemma, again, on the muscle fiber. And it's there that we have that connection. So again, a synapse is any point where we have neurons meeting another neuron, or in this case, meeting a muscle. Okay, so we call that a synapse. A synaptic cleft is actually a gap that's between the neuron and the muscle fiber. So any kind of neural connection is actually going to be a little bit of space between them, right? We're not going to have muscle fiber directly linked to the other muscle fiber. There's a little bit of space. I mean, like a tiny, tiny amount of space. That's a gap there. And the gap is there just to allow for the transmission of molecules, right, to actually send the signals from place to place. Because if things were directly linked together, right, you're only going to be limited to, it doesn't function quite as well. Okay, but this allows us a place where the neurotransmitters can be released and then can get to bind to the particular surface of the muscle cell. Okay. So let's talk about the broad signaling steps. Okay, so the steps of the signal in the motor end plate are these. Okay, essentially you're starting out with the action potential, and so what's ended up happening is that you have an action potential that's in the motor neuron, so actually in the neuron itself. Again, that signal that's being sent to the muscles, right? So the action potential arrives at the synaptic terminal. So the terminal is like the end of the neuron. Okay, and what this does is it ends up releasing acetylcholine. So we learned in muscle contraction, acetylcholine is a signal that sends from the motor neuron to the actual sarcolemma, which causes the shape of different motor neuron or different protein channels to change. Okay, so acetylcholine ends up binding to the synapse, right? Binding to the membrane, which it causes the motor end plate to allow the movement of sodium ions. So by changing the shape of those proteins, right, allowing those channels to open, sodium suddenly rushes out of the cell into the membrane, and we depolarize everything, right? We end up changing the overall charge of the actual motor neuron. So in this case, sodium is leaving from the outside, going in. Okay, so the action potential ends up developing on the sarcolemma, again, because we have that change in charge, and then acetylcholinase ends up coming in later on as we're, like, say, resetting the muscle, and that ends up breaking the bond with acetylcholine, which can get reabsorbed and utilized again as another neurotransmitter somewhere else. Okay, so again, the signals here, what you really need to know is that we have the potential. The potential releases acetylcholine in the synapse. The synapse, again, that molecule just kind of goes across the gap, meets the motor neuron. That motor neuron, at the motor end plate, the acetylcholine attaches to that, allows for movement of sodium ions across that, and the action potential develops on the sarcolemma. So again, we get that change in the membrane because we depolarize a part of it. And so we end up resetting that again as our sodium goes in, potassium goes out, right? Resets the channels, which allows everything to reset. So immediately as acetylcholine comes in and binds to those particular sites, acetylcholinase comes in, breaks down that, and binds to that acetylcholine for it to reestablish its original set. So again, it helps kind of reset the overall thing. And again, like I said before, this happens super, super fast, like super fast, like faster than I can really describe to you, right? In order for any of those muscle contractions to occur. Okay, so that's kind of the broad overview. Okay, so when we're talking about the motor unit, again, the motor unit is the idea that you have a bunch of muscle fibers that are attached to a specific nerve, and the more connections you have between nerve and muscle fibers, the more nerves you have, the greater the signal is going to be, and the more precise the signaling is going to be. Okay, so all muscle fibers are controlled by a single motor neuron. Okay, so depending upon which muscle fiber you're referring to, like where it is in the body, you may have one nerve cell, right, per like 2 or 3 or muscle fibers, or you may have one nerve cell that's doing hundreds and hundreds of motor neurons, or hundreds and hundreds of muscle fibers. So for example, in your eyes, which require really fast movement, right, as you move from left to right very, very quickly, in order to protect yourself, right, you need those eyes not only to find food, but for protection, those things. Like having a lot of motor neurons attached to that allows for very rapid, precise movement. Okay. If we're talking about motor neurons to large group muscles, so say something that's happening in your leg, like your adductors or something like that, you're going to have like one nerve cell for every several hundred muscle fibers. So again, you're not going to have as precise or the same level of precision in that musculature, right? If you send a signal down to your leg, like if you like say get a shock or something in your leg, you end up having a twitch for a whole lot of your leg, right? So think about like what's happening with your reflex as you get hit in the knee, right? If you experience that knee hit, right, you're going to get that signal that's going to send a kind of a very large signal overall, because you're stimulating a lot of motor neurons all at once, right? And by stimulating those units together, you're going to see a larger thing of muscle versus the very precise incremental motion you can see what's happening in someone's eyes. Okay. All right, so that's just the broad overview of connections of communication with your nerves. Again, just very quick, kind of the idea that you've got a synapse, you've got acetylcholine's coming in and making the muscle thing go, right? And that you have different connections for different amounts of nerves per the preciseness of motion that you need to get. Okay. All right. So if you have questions, let me know.